Well, you can see a great glob of grease there, and we need rid of that. That's fine. I'll bring the camera back into the picture. Just put that lever in place. Once I've got the screws in place, I'm not in any danger of losing my tension from the film advance, and I'll be much happier. One screw in, that's enough. That's going to stop anything from unwinding on me. Now these two screw heads, one was very covered in glue and quite ugly with it. That's that one there. It actually looks quite acceptable now. It's made nice and clean. Right, so what do we got here now? Press down the release lever, hold down the lock lever, and I can swing the film advance. Smooth in its action, positive, no problems, everything moving smoothly just as it should do there. And that is the base of the camera dealt with. So turning my attention to the top of the camera, we've got our chrome trim plate to go on here, and the shutter cocking rack and so forth. Alright. This is only held down with the strap lug at the end of the camera. That's the only sort of thing that directly holds this down. I'll just get the screws for that ready. And I will give this chrome trim one quick wipe over with the naphtha. There's not really any serious problem here, a little bit of dust perhaps, more fingerprints than anything else, and probably most of those are mine. I'll take my strap plug, fit that in place. Now the holes in the strap lug are usually slotted. I find that if you push the strap lug towards the end of the camera, as far as it will go against the screw heads, that is the right position to be in. Well, that's good. I think I'll put that rewind assembly together next and put that in place. The shaft for the rewind is two pieces. The inner piece, which is pulled up into the winding position when you're rewinding the film, like that. And the main shaft, I'm just lubricating this bush here, just with a bit of synthetic grease. There's a small brass coloured spring clip in there which keeps the tension on there and just sort of locates that in the neutral position. Right, that can pop into place, and there are two screws. before I tighten those screws up, I better check the two screws here and here that I haven't tightened yet. Swing that across. Nip those screws down, yeah, that's good. Alright, what's next? Oh, shutter cocking rack. We have the rack from this one, and I have the two examples that I had to show you earlier, but this is the rack from this camera. Here's the bracket that's going to hold it down, the support for the film release lever, that screw from the bracket. We've got the strap plug and two screws for the strap plug. Alright, I'm just going to lubricate that cocking rack with a bit of synthetic grease. Just both faces there. Certainly on the teeth and the underside here. Typically a little bit there doesn't hurt. Let's drop that into place. Now that's a very, very snug fit. And I did say that that screw appeared to be bent. I suspect it's pushed across. Yeah, it certainly runs eccentric. I'm just going to replace that. It should be a better fit than that. It may have been bent. It may have been, there's two things that are possible with something like that. Either the rack was too loose, there's too much play there, and so some helpful person pushed this forward in order to close up the gap, or it was just too tight, so that the tension's actually pushed the screw away and bent it. And it'll just be bent down at the thread ending. I'm just going to replace that entirely with the identical piece from my parts. I probably said earlier that that support post in this particular camera was clearly the type known as the service replacement, which has a slightly larger diameter screw head in practice, which pushes the rack further over. And I'm replacing it with exactly the same part, and I want to see what that clearance looks like. It's certainly too tight. I can tell you that straight away, that's just not going. I'm going to replace this with the normal standard part, not the service replacement part, the one that has slightly more clearance. And we'll see how we get on with that. It's that one there I want. So effectively the screw head here is slightly smaller, providing slightly more clearance. Yeah, that's just ideal. So it was a bad choice of screw there. They'd used the wrong screw, one that was going to be too tight for the job, and effectively it had been bent by the action of the film advance trying to push that across. I think we're in the right start position. I'll just check and see if we can actually get that one tooth further up. I'm fairly sure we can't on the 3 big C, because I don't want this banging against the end of the track at this end. We'll find out. I'll just put this support in place. And what we're after, of course, is a nice smooth running film advance with the shutter cocking rack moving freely without undue clearance, just enough to do its job properly. So I'm just going to check to see if this will actually function. Normally what will happen is if it's too far over, this rack will actually hit this chrome trim at this point, and that will prevent it from completing its action. So we'll put this bracket in as well. And the only reason I'm concerned to get it as far this way as possible is to avoid any conflict between the back of that cocking rack and the rangefinder, which is certainly a possibility. Right, let's just see if that'll complete its action. Press down the release button, hold down the lock lever, swing my film advance, and it won't complete the action. So I'll press the release lever, allow that to come back, and I know I've got to move that rack just one tooth back this way on that gear. It's good to know these things. It's saves you getting into any grief. So that's where it's going to go. Some cameras, these brackets have 3 holes in them. Some cameras have 3 holes filled. Some of them only have the back 2 filled. I'm just looking here. I don't have a stray screw, so I know that only the back 2 holes were filled in that position. That's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. There was a brass washer sitting in this position supporting this strap lug. That screw has a really odd feel to it. Oh yeah, that screw hole has been chopped out a bit, I think. Let me have a look at that. It's right on the edge of the casting. I think that that's a bad fit. I mean, as I say, these cameras were made up out of spare parts. There's probably a reason why some of these parts ended up sidelined and weren't used in main production. That's probably because they were imperfect examples for one reason or another. Anyway, that shutter cocking action there is good, smooth. The clearance between the rack and the teeth there appears to be good. Just check that there's not too much play there. No, that's about appropriate. I think that's very good. Okay, I can move on to the next bit. Well, before I put the door on at the front of the camera, I've got to put the shutter release shaft back in the camera. This gets a bit tricky because here's our opportunities for problems. So I'll slide this in from the top. I've applied a little bit of molybdenum paste to that. I've got to fit its little return spring in place here. And I don't want this to ping off and disappear down into the depths of the body, which is what it's very keen to do. Okay, so that's sitting in place. Now to keep that in place, I normally put a rubber band between the shutter release and the strap lug at the end of the camera. That just applies enough tension here to keep this in place so it doesn't fall out while I'm working on the camera. Means that I can extend the front. There's nothing to fall out now. It's all held in place by the shutter release shaft here. And it means I can fit the front door. So to fit the front door, I want a little wipe of synthetic grease in that slot there, some at the base of the camera in the same position. The arms here just slide into place in those grooves, and the door swings into position like that. Now in this case I'd noticed that there was some play in that door, and normally in production there would have been washers in there, some spacer washers. Now for whatever reason there are none in this camera, and I suspect it could be because whoever was doing the assembly didn't know that that was the practice. Or it could be that they didn't have any washers there to use. I honestly don't know, but I'm going to find some washers because there is some play there, and I just want to take that out. It'll only take one washer, I would think. I'll see if I can fit one washer on top of that door there, and I can. And fit that hinge pin screw. I'll check the feel of that door. There's still a fair bit of play there. I'll see if I can fit a washer at the base. Doesn't look like it's going to be that one. Let's try a thinner one. There were often as many as 3 washers used. Just lining up the washer and the screw hole. Is that not pulling in correctly? That screw doesn't really want to pull into position. I'll just slacken off the one at the top and give this a bit of a wriggle. That screw's certainly sticking up proud. I wonder whether that's... Now it's going on. That's better. It's seated now. Not sure what the problem was there. That's a good action. There's no play in that door. That's very good. I'm pleased with that. The leatherette from the base of the camera has just got a fair incrustation of adhesive and so forth on it, so I'm just scraping off the excess, the loose stuff. And then I'll wipe this down gently with some naphtha, which will remove any grease and quite possibly soften up some of this adhesive tape. Certainly when the adhesive was put on here, it wasn't put on particularly evenly. I suppose if the camera was manufactured 17 years after the main run had been produced, that it's quite possible that they didn't have staff on hand doing the same tasks that had previously been done. Or as I suspect, these cameras were assembled quite separately from the manufacturing plant, and whoever had been delegated the job was not that familiar either with how the production had been done. I do have another little piece of knowledge I can impart later too regarding this particular camera, because I noticed that the illustration used for this model in the McCohen's guide definitely uses a different top cover than this one. This camera, that top cover was the last and latest of the 3Cs, and it was, you could tell that because there was no moulding line here. But on the illustration used in McCohen's, that moulding line is obviously present, which means that that wasn't one of the last and latest tops. It was a spare part from the earlier ones that had been used. Right, let's see if I can get this gob of grease off the leatherette here. It's pretty thick. That was that patch of black crap underneath the advance lever. To exercise some caution wiping at leatherettes with anything vaguely solvent like, because you know it could just be what makes the leatherette go soft and gooey. Right, well I'm not going to go crazy with that. I think that is quite clean enough. And the camera body, of course, now can be tipped upside down because we have got our rubber band around here to stop the shutter release falling to bits. Come on video camera, hurry up. I'll remove my film advance lever. I can see I need to do a bit more work on cleaning that up too prior to doing anything. I will give the base plate one last wipe over. I've done a pretty good job of removing the old adhesive from the camera base plate. Both the chrome trim and the aluminium body that's visible in the centre there. Here I'm just really interested in getting rid of any oils and grease that I've managed to transfer to this plate while I've been working on it, so that the adhesive sticks properly. And that'll do. That's all I need. And here's the leatherette, and now we want the adhesive. Right, so I'll apply some to the leatherette. And I'll move that about using a toothpick to get an even layer over the leatherette. And I'd like to avoid getting any on the top surface of the leatherette, just on the off chance that it damages the leatherette in some way. Now I'll apply some to the paper here and transfer it onto the leatherette with a toothpick. So I'm being probably a little bit more cautious than I would normally be, but then again it's a pretty rare example, this camera, so I do not want to make a muck of it. I don't imagine that this camera's ever going to see a lot of use, but you never know. Right, here's my leatherette with all the adhesive in place. Let's fit that in position. Now leatherettes normally shrink back, so they usually do not want to fit neatly around a boss like that. So it's worth making sure that that's firmly settled. This is looking pretty good. I'm quite pleased with the look of this. Just check that it's pressed down around that back catch release button there. It's seated there, seated in nice and neatly into the recess there, and seated around that boss there. That's good. That leatherette's nice and neat, nice and clean, and exactly as I hope it to be. Let's have a look at this lever again. I thought I had this clean, but clearly not. The underside's okay, but the top side, oh, it's got, it almost looks like adhesive there. It shouldn't really have any adhesive. Yeah, it certainly doesn't want to dissolve. Here I'm just making sure I clear away any lumps in that adhesive. The leatherette will cover that. It doesn't need to be pristine. But here there's just a touch of something on that. It's might be adhesive. Either that or it's something really nasty in the way of dried grease. Yeah, that really doesn't want to come off. Now looking at this, it's a polished aluminium surface there, so I can see quite a distinct fingerprint there, which doesn't clean away, which means it's etched into that polished surface. So it's anyone's guess whose fingerprint that is. Of course it's not mine, couldn't be mine. That'll do nicely. Get this film advance lever back in place on the camera. Film advance levers like this I'm more familiar with from the Retina IIIC S. But I'm willing to be convinced that they're also used on the 3 big C's. They're identical to look at from the outside, it's just the type of screws that we used on the earlier cameras was different to that. Right, leatherette patch for that, which is hiding over here. Now I'll clean this up. Now I'm just rubbing this with some naphtha on a cotton bud The adhesive on this is looser. That's good. Since these cameras that were used for were given to VIPs were probably never used in anger. They probably never got to wear out. Very likely, few of them have ever had to be repaired. So, let's see how we get on with this. Just applying a little bit of adhesive. I think I want a little bit more than that, but I'm not going to just squirt it on there. I'll just add on the paper and transfer it over. This is the sort of approved way of putting adhesive on. Transfer a little bit exactly where you want it. Don't get that great big tube of adhesive anywhere near the piece you're working on, in case you end up accidentally squirting a huge gob onto the camera and creating problems. That'll do. That's nice and neat. Let's get that thread off there and put this in place. That's fine. The back catch release cover can go in place, and the tripod surround.